Bonjour.
Bonjour.
Bonsoir. Dear friends, you recognize that beautiful smile and irresistible lady, Lisa Perrotti. She's back on JCB Live, and I'm so excited because we have a monument of history here of knowing wine tasting, knowing wine heritage. And Lisa, how many wines a year do you taste?
A lot. Gosh, I had been reviewing 3,000 to 4,000 a year, but that's not all that I taste. I usually probably taste more like 5,000 a year or more. And then, what actually gets published is around 3,000 to 4,000.
So can you imagine how many bottles a day she gets to discover and learn about? So fascinating. As a reminder, Lisa has been leading for the last 13 years the Wine Advocate, the fabulous Robert Parker magazine, reviews of the great wines around the world. And now it's going to be announced in a few days, so I cannot say anything. She's starting something enthralling, something magical for the world of wine, and maybe more. So stay tuned till Monday, right?
Yeah, Monday the 17th, we're coming out with a press release about the new project. So yes, I recently left Robert Parker Wine Advocate after working there for 13 years, or more than 13 years. Going out on my own.
Big decision.
With a friend, and yes, it's going to be very exciting, I think.
Well, before we start to taste wine, what would be interesting to ask Lisa, what made you decide again to evolve into a new space? Because what is so exciting is Lisa is a great entrepreneur, studied her life in theater. She's a fabulous writer. Then she went into the wine business, from the champagne side to then a buyer of great wines from around the world in Asia and Europe. Then she meets her husband, and then she meets Robert Parker and leads Parker. So she's had really 3 big segments of her life.
I've done it all.
Done it all. So how do you come about? You're well installed within the Wine Advocate. You run the show. It's a very comfortable job. You obviously financially very rewarded. You decide to make another jump.
Yeah. Well, I think, the next stage is, I hadn't really done anything on my own, and had that creative freedom to be able to produce something that is done in my way. And although, I was able to make a lot of the decisions when I was at the Wine Advocate, there was a lot of decisions I couldn't make. And so, being able to keep that little kernel, that ethos of integrity, of independence, is something that will always be important to me. And maybe the most important thing that Robert Parker taught me is, being completely unbiased when you're doing any sort of criticism, and having no agendas.
Yeah.
But also, I think that wine is so much more, and there's much more compelling ways of telling the story of wine, and how to describe a wine, visually, and getting that story behind the glass, behind the winemaker, and for me, it just having that creative freedom and that freedom to be absolutely independent were the important factors for making the move.
Very Shakespearean, to be or not to be. And was it very difficult, though, to finally decide that's what you're going to do? Because a lot of friends with us today are probably as well. It's a new year. You always reassess what you do, what you want to do. And I really commend you for that, because I'm very admirative, because it's not easy. So what triggered it for you?
Oh, well, I think the trigger for me, I was just reading the stats the other day about how many people have left their jobs during the whole, lockdown and COVID period and pandemic. But I think that, we've all been doing a lot of soul searching and, thinking about exactly what we want to do and how we want to do it, what's important in life.
Yes.
And I think, sticking to your principles is very important. Being able to express yourself, being able to do what you know is right, and having that freedom to be able to do that are essential, to making that decision on, when you're leaving what is ostensibly, a really great job anyway.
For sure.
And going out and starting something new.
So what do you recommend to everybody to do at the beginning of the year? Did you make a checklist? Did you make the pros and cons? Or you felt, that's it, I'm going to do it and I'm...
Well, I think it's more, in your gut, and following your heart. It's really, we all have that little inner voice that tells us, this is the right thing to do. This is what you want to do.
Yeah.
And I probably won't, go to another job again in my life. So, this is it. This is what I want to build.
Yes.
And this will, be an expression of what I believe. And I think that's so important.
Yeah.
You're the ultimate entrepreneur. So.
Well, we love to do what we believe, and we love to do it with passion, and that's why I'm so excited. You all know, dear friends, we have the book still available as well that Lisa wrote, a phenomenal book on wine tasting and everything you should know on wine, and how she looks at wine, how she tastes wine, how she apprehends wine. And she's written another phenomenal article on a new book that just came out as well, which is so exciting. So we're going to have Lisa, as soon as she allows us, after this long trip to Europe, to release her new endeavor with all of you, so you could subscribe to her new herself, which I cannot wait. We'll be subscriber number 1. We 2, 3, and 4, because we are a big fan. And dear friends, today we're going to do a topic that is really close to our hearts, and a topic that all of you have put your beautiful lips into. This is the magical world of Chardonnay. And you probably remember the tasting we did with Lisa on Wapo Hill on that crystal table. One of my favorite time on JCB Live. We spent an hour and a half discussing wine.
Yeah, we couldn't stop talking.
Couldn't stop. Millions of you.
You just wind me up and I'll go.
Well, we love it, and learning from the best. Those are very privileged moments. You feel you're fortunate to be with us today. I feel very fortunate to be here with Lisa as well, because I have so much to learn. So let's talk Chardonnay.
One of my favorite topics is Chardonnay, and I don't think people talk enough about Chardonnay. There are a lot of, first of all, Chardonnay comes in many guises.
Yes.
And at the lower end, it can produce, quite a simple, nice, very great glugging wine. And for a lot of people, that's their idea of what Chardonnay is. It's a big brand almost, Chardonnay. But at the other end of the spectrum,
yes,
Chardonnay almost behaves like a red wine.
Yes.
It's got so many components to it that are shared with many great red wines that people collect. For example, ageability, the ability to become something more with careful cellaring, the textural component of it.
Yeah.
As we all know, red wine gets texture largely from tannins, but with Chardonnay, it's different. It's silky, it's satiny. Sometimes there can be a little bit of phenolic texture because there's quite a bit of phenolics or tannins in the skins of Chardonnay. So there's so many elements with Chardonnay, and then when you layer in the winemaking, when you consider all of the clones and how very different they are around the world, it's quite a fascinating grape. And for me, oftentimes it is my go-to grape when I'm starting out the evening.
Well, as a Burgundian, can I be more happy? And dear friends, when you think about the DNA where we come from, right? Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, and that's why I love what you just said. And this is really a big Burgundian philosophy. You said it behaves like a red wine. I love that expression. I'm going to use it because, when you think about that wonderful tree line, you have Pinot Chardonnay on one side, Pinot Blanc, Pinot Gris. On the other side, you have Pinot Noir, Pinot Beurreau, and Pinot Meunier, and many others. So it's really coming from the same origin.
Absolutely.
So the way you're describing it as a red wine, I love it.
Yeah, no, and you know, what the article that I actually wrote for this great book on California, which has just come out, it's from available from the Académie du Vin Library, and that's not a pitch per se, but I do love the book.
Well, we'll get the book and we'll have it available as well here.
Yeah, I just wrote one very small article for this, but it was a fascinating article to write because I was kind of given free rein to choose a topic, and I wanted to do something unusual that maybe people don't think about when they think of California, but is great about California, and that is the Chardonnays. The Chardonnays here are just like astonishingly good, and if anybody's going to give Burgundy a run for their money, it's going to be some of the great California Chardonnays. So I wanted to sort of dive a little bit deeper into what makes them special, what makes them unique beyond the terroir. And so the article it's just a short article about heritage clones.
Well, and before we go there, let's explain, you know, the origin of Chardonnay, maybe, and then what is Massal selection and what is Clonal selection, and then we'll go to the clone. And dear friends, we're going a little deeper, but obviously we are with the expert, so we have to.
The expert.
No, you are.
You are on the history though, because obviously coming from Burgundy, you know the background and the history of Chardonnay like no one else, and then.
Well, we'll start with the first one. That will be the Vougeot Premier Cru. We purposely started with the Californian, and this is our Napa Valley expression. Why 76? Because of 1976, we said the French got beaten up at the Judgment of Paris. It's a wink to our great friend Steven Spurrier and America taking over as well on the same world stage as the French wines. And we wanted that luscious and elegant wine to be at the forefront and to see Napa Valley can make great Chardonnay, right?
Yeah. Well, you know, at least as great as Burgundy can, and you know, I see that again and again as well. The styles are very different, and I think that's one thing that we need to point out. There's a big difference between stylistic preferences and quality. And there will be some people who just prefer the style of Burgundy over the style of many Californian Chardonnays, and vice versa. So really, it's you have to sort of take those two elements apart, and you know, just look at the quality factor. For me, I love both.
Yes.
I love Burgundy, but I also love great Californian Chardonnay. And sometimes I'm in the mood for one, and sometimes in the mood for the other.
I'm with you.
But yeah, sorry, we should get back to the history of Chardonnay and in Burgundy, of course. Maybe we'll let you take it for Burgundy, and then I'll
very
for
briefly. Well, we got very fortunate that the monks, under very phenomenal observation, have realized that we can make extraordinary Chardonnay in Burgundy. So, same foundation as Pinot, you know, one white, one red. This is why we often find them in the same places, and they really blossom and shine magically in the same terroir. And in the case of Burgundy, we really dated back from the 14th to the early 15th century.
Wow.
And we have a small village, you know, next to Pouilly-Fussé named Chardonnay. Right? It's actually 1.5 kilometers. I'm sure you've been. Lovely little town. And this is really where it all started. And it really became, you know, very, very known in the Chablis area, and of course in the Côte de Beaune area. And occasionally in the Côte de Nuit, this is what we'll have later as the monastery wine of the famous monks of Cîteaux, you know, the great order of Cîteaux. And this is really where it started. And I cannot say that it's always traceable to that time. And a lot of the Chardonnay at the time, specifically this one, could have a little bit of blend of Pinot Gris and or Pinot Blanc. And that's the case of the Clos de Vougeot Blanc still today. We have 4%. Yes, so then we talk about Corton Charlemagne, and then obviously the Montrachet series, the Chassagne and the Puligny, and that whole area of Burgundy, that really started to become very powerful 15th, 16th, 17th century, and then obviously thereafter became magical and inspiration for the world. So that's really there. But what is so exciting is identifying the plant as a selection. So maybe that's where you should take over and explain, before being a clone, how do we identify it, mark it, and then we create a clone from it?
Well, basically, in the vineyards, I mean, for centuries now, as we're talking in Burgundy, Chardonnay has been growing and slightly mutating every time it gives off an offspring. When you take cuttings from it, when you it creates seeds, and those seeds are propagated, then you get slight mutations. Basically what farmers used to do was they would go through their fields and they would see which plants are doing the best of those mutations, and they would select those, and those are the ones that they'd take the cuttings from, and those cuttings would become a clone, basically, because they're coming from the plant. But if you want to propagate a new plant, then basically you would take the seeds from the plant and go from there.
And you could see maybe in the old world of Burgundy, I was just there a few days ago, and it's fascinating because we mark the rootstock of a certain color. So if you jog in the vineyards of Côte de Nuit, Côte de Beaune, you could see who does Massal selection. So you observe it, typically for 5 years. That's kind of the length of time we enjoy. Same for roses, same for orchards, same for fruit trees and everything else. And you mark it, you analyze the behavior through observation that you make, quantitative and qualitative. And then after 5 years, you decide to do exactly what Lisa explained, and then you reproduce the endogenous terroir with no deviation. That's the advantage. So you're sure that that plant that you liked from Clos de Vougeot Blanc is the same and recurrently replanted. So you don't mix it, but as Lisa said so well, there's mutation sometimes, and there's evolution. As human beings, we are different than we were, 16 million years ago, naturally. So that's evolution. So we try in Burgundy to be very true to that terroir. So we have on the other side of the Saône, or on the other side of the RN74, depending who, every estates of the caliber that we love to flirt with, to do our own field. We're very Voltairean. We create our own garden, and we replicate each vineyards that we love and create what we call Massal selection. So similar, if you like a rose in your garden, you're going to bud it, and you're going to really keep it as such. And that's why a great gift in England or in France is often when you go to people's home in the spring, when it's maybe time to plant, you bring your own seeds for your rose or your vegetables or what have you as a heirloom selection, and you say, Lisa, I want you to have that rose in your garden. It would do well. And often you're amazed.
That's a great gift.
It's a great gift, right?
Yeah. Well, and I think, most people who garden here, understand now what heirloom selections are of, for example, tomatoes. And it's exactly the same premise, basically those plants that have adapted specifically to a place or a site, and they give off unique attributes. And those become sought after or treasured because they're slightly better.
That's right.
They give off better fruit, more flavor. Maybe they don't give the greatest yields, but they give enough yield for to be a profitable business. But they're really going after the quality in many cases, and that's why a lot of people are seeking out heritage fruits and vegetables around the world, and it's the same in the world of wine.
And that's the research you did, which is pretty amazing.
Well,
in terms of your clones.
Yes. I mean, our history here in California is not nearly as long as the history in Burgundy.
We still look good for being 500 years old. Right?
Exactly.
Takes a lot of drinking Chardonnay.
It does. It preserves you. But it goes back to around the mid to late 1800s when cuttings were being brought over from the motherland in Europe, and specifically in the case of Chardonnay from Burgundy. Today we still see a lot of those original, or the children, I should say.
That's the children, very well said.
The children of those original clones that were brought over from Burgundy in the mid to late 1800s. And specifically what we talk a lot about is the Old Wente clone selection that came over, to Wente Winery in Livermore back in the late 1800s, before Prohibition, mind you. Which sort of brought things to a screeching halt for a little while there in America. But these clones were, propagated and shared amongst other growers around California, specifically up, here in Sonoma. Well, here in Napa, we're in Napa today, but in Sonoma as well, up in here in Northern California. So these clones were shared and shared again and shared again, and different growers took from the Old Wente selection and started making their own selections as well out of the own mutations that were created in their own vineyards.
That's right.
The vines that did the best in their own vineyards were marked and selected out, and they created their own versions of those Old Wente clones. So Old Wente clone actually is very prolific.
That's it.
And widespread here in California now. And it's a good thing. I mean, we do have other clones available here, what we call the Dijon clones, for example. They came over later. But people seem to be going back to those Old Wente clone selections.
And why is that, do you think?
Well, it's more a matter of quality than quantity, because they do tend to give lower yields, but the flavors that they give. And I should say that there's a whole range now of Old Wente clone selections. We can't just talk about, one specific style. We get things like the Muscat clone actually comes from the Old Wente clone selection. And then we get the traditional hen and chicks sort of clone. So the Muscat, I should say, is a little bit more like an aromatic grape. It behaves more like muscat or almost a Gewürztraminer. Sometimes I find
absolutely.
Kind of very aromatic perfume, floral style and kind of spicy, whereas you get the traditional Old Wente clone with some larger berries and some smaller berries in the bunch, giving very small yields. Some of the bunches are tiny tiny as well. But man, they are powerhouses of flavor.
That's right.
But the important thing here is, how these vines that originally came over from Burgundy have adapted to California conditions and been selected out for what does the best of those mutations here in California. And in various parts of California, you even see different selections where you'll see, for example, the Hyde selection.
That's right.
Of Old Wente clone, where it's been selected out specifically by Larry Hyde for its attributes. And each of these produces very unique styles that seem to speak so much better of the terroirs that they're coming from, because they are adapted to those terroirs. And I think that's the key.
And that's the key. So how do you identify this adaptability from soil to climate to plants? And what is your view of where we are in California today and the work we still need to do?
Well, there's so many, what we are finding is there's so many great little pockets of areas, of cooler climate areas, generally speaking. But, there's some slightly warmer areas here in Napa that produce some very interesting Chardonnays. So it's not just about climate. It's not just about soil. I know in Burgundy, limestone is so important. Limestone versus clay and the different types of wines that they produce from those different soils. We've got exactly the same here. But what it is about marrying a type of vine, a clone, that works well on the soil and the climate and the unique attributes of a site. And that's where the magic comes in, when somebody, and it's a slow process. It takes a lot of time. It takes many years and experiments. But, from noticing, oh, this vine or this block of vines produces significantly better fruit than this one over here. Well, maybe we'll clone this for what it's doing, and we'll plant some more over here. And that's kind of how it works. So, you know, growing great wine or making great wine, and it is grown, has so much to do with observation. And trial and error over many years. You can't, you know, just import, you know, some planting material from Burgundy and say, boom, it's going to do great here. Because that's not the answer. That doesn't work. What you need is something that is specifically adapted and works very well for the site that you have, and is, you know, done that over a number of years. And so we're really coming into our own here in California now. That all of that experiment, that trial and error,
I'm so thrilled,
is really working.
And we're
out.
not into artificial intelligence, dear friends. It's what you just heard. It's empirical analysis, trial and error, and really tasting a lot. So for Lisa today, number 76 is Napa Valley. And we wanted to show our big focus on Chardonnay is typically Sonoma, Russian River, Sonoma Coast, and obviously, you know, overall California, even beyond Oregon, another region. And here we wanted to showcase a different style. So people would say, Napa, really? It's not Cabernet, it's Chardonnay? What do you think of that? And what, within the families of style, what family does it belong to? I'm going to have a little more.
Well, you know,
here we go.
First of all, I love that you brought the 2017 vintage. I love 2017 for Chardonnay. I think it was a great vintage for Chardonnay. In fact, a lot of the Chardonnays were coming in or came in just about the time of the heat wave that year on the Labor Day. So they're a lot fresher and more sort of cooler, so to speak, than a lot of the red wines made that year who had to go through that heat wave. And then, you know, obviously we had the trials of the fires later on that year. But the Chardonnays were all, you know, they were in before any of that happened, for the most part, or they were coming in as the heat wave broke. So they're extraordinary, I think, in terms of quality and a lot of aging potential. This one is, you know, barely budging in terms of its evolution. It's still very youthful. And there's
You're talking about me or the wine?
Both.
Oh, good. You see, I'm getting younger again. I'm entering my 47th year now. You see, I'm going backward like the wine. So thank you for telling me I'm youthful.
You know, I think Napa, in many respects, still has a bad rap for again, some of those Chardonnay styles that were produced in the 90s and the early 2000s, where they were big, blousy, kind of overblown, oaky, oily.
Following a recipe, really.
Yeah, following kind of a recipe, whereas now we're finding, people are finding cooler areas to plant Chardonnay in Napa Valley. They're producing wines with more finesse. And I won't say that they're early harvesting them, because that's not really the answer either. You don't get the full flavor evolution when you do that. But when you've got your yields low, and when you're using the right clones, and you've got the right site, and you've got a good vintage to help, then what you get is this, you know, a longer, drawn-out growing season for Chardonnay that produces really complex wines with a great I love the acid backbone on this.
Thank you.
Because you need that. And all of the texture as well that you come to expect. Just a little bit of that tannic or phenolic grip on here. I'm not sure if that's from skin contact, but it could be from the oak as well, because the oak will lend a little bit of that texture.
I think that's how it came from.
So all of this, you know, goes and creates this wine that's really quite satiny with a little bit of that grippiness from the oak texture. I love that textural interest on it, with that, you know, razor sharp backbone of acid coming through, all the richness of fruit. And what I love about the fruit here, and this is something about, you know, I'm not even sure, because I haven't talked to you about where the wine comes from, apart from Napa, or, you know, the clones that are in there or anything like that. But I would almost guess that there is some old Wente clone selection in here, because you get
That's
that.
why she's Lisa Perrotti.
Well, no, but you get the layers. I mean,
Yeah.
it's really, I could pick them out blind in a lineup, because with that shot berries that you
Sure.
get, the larger and the smaller berries,
Yes.
you get a range of different flavor compounds. Some of them from the smaller berries, this more sort of citrusy, super intense character, and a minerality that comes. And then from the larger berries, a slightly more tropical or peachy kind of character.
Very true.
And those layers of flavors for me are what really take it to that next level, you know, and they evolve so beautifully when the wine ages.
Well, exactly. And can you, so maybe two questions. Why Chardonnay king and queen to our eyes? And how long can a Chardonnay age?
Well, yeah, gosh, that's a very good question. I mean, you probably had much older Chardonnays than I've had, but I have had some.
I was born actually before Lisa, so yes, I have.
It can age remarkably well.
Yes.
I mean, I've had you know, Burgundies from the '60s,
For sure.
even, and they've been obviously showing evolution. They're more of that butterscotchy,
Yes.
sort of savory almost character to them.
2 weeks ago, I had the Clos Blanc 1981, still phenomenal.
Yeah.
And I had a Corton Charlemagne 1999, obviously still quite young.
Yeah, I love that vintage.
Very good vintage. And then we had a Bâtard Montrachet from 1969.
Well, yes. Do you know, I have had a Montrachet from 1969 as well. And that's the one I was thinking of when I was
Yes.
talking about, you know, how long can it age? Because it's remarkable, isn't it? That
And you know, there was two people at the table, not in the wine world necessarily, or drinking wine as much or tasting wine as we do. And the wine had big evolution, and they thought, is the wine oxidized? Is the wine gone? And I said, not at all. This is, and then the wine opened up in a different way.
Well, this is it. You know, and this is the funny thing about these really old white Burgundies is
Yes.
that when you first pour them in the glass, or you first pour them in decanter, because I would recommend decanting them.
Yes.
They almost do seem dead, don't they?
That's right.
And then give them, you know, maybe 20 minutes, and not too long because you don't want them to die, but give them just a few minutes there in a decanter or a glass, and boom, they
That's
just
it.
blossom. It's like a
Like
resurrection.
crazy.
Yeah.
Like crazy. And exactly do what Lisa recommended, is decanting. Why is decanting important as well in white wine?
Well, you know, in Chardonnay in particular,
Yes.
it's important for a very young Chardonnay,
Yes.
and for an older Chardonnay as well, and for different reasons. Sometimes you get this sort of sweet spot when a Chardonnay is right in its drinking window. When it's on the edge either side,
Yes.
then I think the decanting becomes important. And for different reasons. Obviously, when it's very young, it's so tightly wound, and it doesn't have that benefit of having oxygen
That's right.
in there, and it really needs some air in there in order to give the opportunity for all of those aromas and flavors to fully express themselves. And sometimes they won't. Sometimes you just open the bottle too young, and it's just going to be, you know, tight, and it just needed more time in the cellar. So that's to be aware of as
Yeah.
well. You know,
Important.
even here in California, you can drink it too young for a lot of the best Chardonnays. So really important to give it at least a year, 2, 3, or 4 for a
Yes.
Burgundy. Here in California, maybe at least a year or 2 in the cellar to really just to give it a chance to break out of those bounds and start to blossom and show itself.
Another aspect in your book that I love as well is temperature.
Yeah.
So let's
Absolutely.
discuss Chardonnay temperature.
Ooh, I can't
because
stand it when it's too cold.
Exactly.
Yeah. So many people serve it too cold, and you can't taste a thing. Chardonnay is almost like a red wine in that respect as well, because I would say maybe just slightly lower than cellar temperature, because I really, everything's just so much more apparent, you know, even the texture, because it seems kind of almost metallic when it's too cold.
That's right.
And then it's just like silky and satiny and beautiful when it's just a little bit warmer in the glass. And likewise, all of those aromas and flavors that you can't really pick up when it's too cold, just come bounding out of the glass, you know, and it's a completely different experience.
And on that note, Lisa, would you touch a little bit on the world of diversity of Chardonnay? Because often I meet a lot of wonderful people who collect the traditional Burgundies, the triptych or other, the Triangle d'Or as we call it, and which is, you know, Chassagne, Puligny, Corton, or, you know, the classicals. And I say go outside of it, even in the south of France, so in Russian River. Or, the world is so diverse of Chardonnay. Would you please touch on that for everyone, how diverse and wild the world of Chardonnay is? Because often, give me a Chablis, I don't want to drink a Chardonnay.
Yep.
And I love that expression.
Yep.
And I smile because people don't think Chablis Chardonnay because it's at such a different taste profile.
Yep. No, it's very true. I always say to people, if somebody says they don't like Chardonnay, I say, well, you don't like white wine. Because it runs the gamut of every style of white wine you can possibly imagine.
Yes.
And that's, you know, very contrary to a lot of other white grapes that seem to, you know, be much more narrow in their expression. Whereas Chardonnay can be everything from very light-bodied and steely and citrusy all the way up to, you know, full-on tropical, rich, oily, and, you know, decadent. So it's everything in between, and you know, it's a winemaker's grape as well, because you have so many options when you're a winemaker. Whether you want to, you know, do an oak style, and I have to say I do prefer a Chardonnay that has some oak in the winemaking.
Yes,
because it produces maybe a more savory style. It brings out a lot of the nuances a little bit more. It helps with the texture, and the flavors just go so beautifully. But if that's not your thing, then there are a lot of unoaked styles as well. A lot of Chablis being, you know, one of them.
Yes.
And some, well, a good deal of Chablis do have some oak, but many do not. And
That's
then
right.
There's factors like malolactic fermentation, which work very well with Chardonnay. They produce those, I hate to say buttery characters because we've moved away from that, but they do tend to tone down the fruit just a little bit and bring up more of a sort of bready, yeasty sort of flavor, and in some cases a slight sort of, butterscotchy.
And why did we, cheers by the way, to the old world for a second, because dear friends, we have two glasses, we have two hands. God was generous with us.
Yeah.
Let's use both of them. Taste from both sides of our nose, you know. Why did we move away from buttery Chardonnay in America winemaking?
Well, I think people just, first of all, it's not very nice. Let's put it that way.
It's too obvious.
When all you're tasting is that chemical compound that's the byproduct of malolactic fermentation, diacetyl, which is the exact same chemical compound that they use in margarine to make it taste like butter. Mm-hmm. That's a natural byproduct of a bacteria, basically, malolactic bacteria, that is instilled in the wine either naturally or it can be, put in artificially. So you can get a really buttery character from overproduction of this diacetyl, this buttery character. But people have gotten much, or I should say winemakers have gotten much smarter about doing malolactic fermentation on Chardonnays in particular, so that you get very little of that buttery or diacetyl character in modern day, and that's partly to do with the strains of bacteria that are being used, but also with the time in oak and how that gets rid of some of that diacetyl character, particularly time on lees. So there's all sorts of factors, and again, it's been trial and error, because I mean, I think everybody's, come across that Chardonnay where somebody was a little bit clumsy with the malolactic fermentation. Even, today it's something that, I see from time to time as a critic. Somebody got a little bit clumsy with the malolactic fermentation, and the wine's just too buttery, and it's just like, yeah. Because really what you want to taste is the grape and the site. That's what you want. And all of those winemaking things need to be in the background. So they produce and they enhance and they do all of these things to put the wine in that sense of place, or the grape variety in that sense of place, to the forefront, while all the winemaking's going on in there in the background. And though, as a critic, I can see it. I can see what's happened there. But, I appreciate how well it's knit into the wine and married into the wine, and so that skill is very visible when you taste the wine. But
yeah. So, how do you recommend to everyone to taste Chardonnay? Would you give us a demonstration of how you taste and analyze Chardonnay? Because I'm so excited that we doing this little session on Chardonnay, because this is a wide world, and we know Cabernet, people think it's so diverse and so unique, which is true, it is, but Chardonnay is identically the same. And, it's not because it's a white wine that it's simple and should be drunk just young and appreciated with certain style of food. Chardonnay, as an example, this one, the Vougeot Clos Blanc, is very good with cheese. Is very good as well with poultry. Is very good as well with an onion soup. Is very good as well.
Or on its own.
On its own. Well, I'll drink to that.
Yeah.
So give us a sense of how we should taste. Maybe I'll give you a little more.
Oh, thank you.
Not that we should not have fun with the older Chardonnay, dear friends, of the Côte de Nuit, planted literally in 1110 by the monks as a complement of the altar wine to the monastery of the chateau.
Wow.
They had planted the 53 hectares of Pinot Noir all around the chateau. And as a triangle, as you come up, originally probably Pinot Blanc, Pinot Gris, we're not sure, then Chardonnay come in, and then it became really predominantly Chardonnay.
Wow.
And today, this wine is 96% Chardonnay, with a little combination of the other two grape varieties still there under Massal selection.
I love that. I love that.
So that's the secret of it. But we have our Passion Collection glass. So walk us through a professional tasting, how Lisa does it with Chardonnay.
Well, first of all, I like the temperatures that these are served at, and as you pointed out before, it's very important not to taste it too cold. And if it is too cold, if you're not getting anything on the nose, or you can see straight away that it's a bit muted, you can always warm it up a bit in the glass. Yeah. We don't need to do that with this one. And make sure you get some air in there. Chardonnay, it's got so many layers, or a great Chardonnay should have so many layers and lots going on there in the glass that you really want to sort of get. So
air, you open the bottle 30 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour?
These are both very young, yes. I would open them early and even decant these, because they are very young. They're at the very beginning of their drinking window cycle. So you really want to get a lot of air in, and even in the time that these have been sitting here in the glass, they've been evolving and opening it up a lot more. So a lot of swirling is good. A lot of.
Which way do you go, left or right?
I can do both. I'm kind
Ooh.
of ambi.
So on one side, dear friends, you create energy clockwise, and counterclockwise, you create chaos. So to do what Lisa is doing professionally, you could use the table. It's a lot easier.
It is a lot.
Some of us
we all start out like this.
Yeah.
Trust me, we all do. Nobody starts doing that.
It's all in the wrist. You see, you move the wrist. Ooh.
Yeah. So either way you swirl it, you can do it the biodynamic way and swirl it one way and then swirl it the other way.
That's it, which is what I do. It's a biodynamic wine.
Yeah, there you go. And really sort of, I do hasten to say that people should smell and really take a good smell before you taste, because most of what you taste is coming from your nose, not your mouth. Your mouth has limited taste bud receptors in terms of what it can taste for flavor.
I'm so much in agreement with you, and you all hear me saying 80% of what I taste is with my nose rather than my mouth. So elaborate on that a little more, because often we've tasted professionally many times together, and Lisa takes a tiny intake in the mouth. You really have an overly developed, fortunately, nose, right? This is your main sensor for you.
Yeah. Well, on your tongue, you basically have taste bud receptors for things like sweet, salty, sour, bitter, umami. And that's a very limited range. And although those are important, it's the combination of what you taste with those receptors and what you smell that gives you what we call flavor. So it's your brain kind of combines these two things when you're given the sensation of flavor in your mouth. So very important to try and smell a great wine just before you taste it, so that you've got that memory of the smell, and it's combining with the flavors in your mouth. And you also pick it up at the back too, because you've got what we call a retronasal olfaction going on at the back, where you've got a tube that connects the back of your nose with the back of your mouth, basically. And you do get a combining of those flavors as well, which is why we say sometimes you can taste more when you swallow than when you don't, because us professional tasters, we're spitting out all the time. And when you really want to taste something,
that's right,
a little swallow.
Well, that's my weakness, is if I go with the mouth, which I obviously have to do specifically as we make wine, is I have to taste, I have to swallow. Yep. It's a lot better if I swallow.
It's a lot clearer, because you do pick up just a little bit more of the flavor at the back there. But yes, and that's it essentially. You might have seen that I was pulling in a little bit of air. Some people, some wine.
How did you do that?
Wine dorks like us go really put a lot of air in there, and it's really about slurping. It's about combining that air with the liquid in your mouth to really sort of volatilize all of those aroma compounds, and then you really get that impact at the back of the throat. It doesn't just work with wine. If you've got like ramen or soup or something like that, any kind of food, bringing a little bit of air in there, slurping.
Same if you want to practice French kiss. I know you've had a French boyfriend before. We won't say that. It's very important to practice air.
Air.
We always need it.
It's all about this. It's all about breathing.
And many of you think we taste Chardonnay differently than Pinot or Cabernet, but not really.
No. But
Champagne, maybe it's a little different.
It is, because you've got bubbles. And obviously Chardonnay is one of the great components of Champagne, and the only component of a Blanc de Blanc. Yes, air is such an important component, as well as smelling. I can't really sort of overstate that.
That's right.
And then, focusing on not just on what you've got there while the wine is in your mouth, but the aftertaste as well. Sometimes just taking a moment to appreciate that aftertaste and different flavors coming through, and how long they linger on your palate. Those are all marks of quality, that it continues to transform after you've swallowed it, and you can still taste it after you've swallowed it, that it lingers a long time. That's a real mark of intensity or concentration of flavor compounds, but also things like, the viscosity of the wine. The texture will linger there for a little bit too.
As we're making everybody jealous with 76 and Le Clos Blanc de Vougeot, what flavor, give us an idea of how you segment your flavors as you analyze a wine.
I don't really segment. I don't have any, system that I go through, but what I try to do when I'm describing the experience to a consumer is I try to pick out the major aromas. I mean, in some glasses of wine, you've got up to 800 different aroma compounds existing in there. And obviously, you can't pick them all out at any one time, because sometimes some are more apparent than others, depending on its state of evolution, the temperature of the glass, how much air is in there. But what I try to do is, when I'm describing an experience that someone can expect from this glass, and this is really about what I do when I write a tasting note, is I try to pick out the major
Yes.
aromas first, and maybe there's 3 or 4 major aromas. You don't want to,
What are the 3 majors for you here?
Oh, for this one,
Yeah.
I would say there's a real pretty lime blossom there, and a lemon curd. It's quite citrusy, with a little bit of white peach.
Yeah. Which is that tiny peach of Burgundy that is very traditional. It's very tight. It's not a big peach. It's a white Burgundy peach that you actually prune very low, so they look pêche de vigne, as we call it, the vine peach.
Yeah.
It's a very unique variety. There's not a lot of flesh necessarily, but it's so flavorful and tasty. Yeah.
And maybe a little bit of floral honeysuckle kind of aroma on there.
Yeah.
And then I tend to pick out something like in the undercurrent, because those are the major ones. So I'll sort of add in the tasting note with hints of, or something to that effect. And then pick out something like, there's almost like a chalk dust kind of smell here. There's a minerally, and you're trying to describe that because a lot of people really hate that term minerality or minerally in a wine, but sometimes there's no better term. And most people that get wine understand what you mean. But for me, I try to be a little bit more specific and say either like crushed rocks or chalk dust.
Yeah.
For me, this is very chalky. It's got a little chalkiness in the undercurrent there. And maybe just a little bit of a spice. There's a spice that I really love to cook with called coriander seed.
Yeah, for sure.
And just a little bit of that. It's almost a citrusy kind of spice. But
You're opening my eyes on it. I did not see it. Thank you. No, but it's interesting because Lisa is tasting similar to a fragrance taster. The head, the heart, and the core. You go into those 3 segments of, okay, your overall impression, what dominates, and then the hints, and then the hearts, right? So I taste a little differently as I taste wine, so I love that idea.
I hasten to add that, I think a lot of people think, we're making this up, or, this is all, kind of crap, you can't smell all those things in the wine. And I think the important thing to impress upon people is that, you can, the more that you smell and taste wine, you can start to pick out these aromas. And all of these aromas that I'm describing here, they don't just exist in grapes or in wine. They're present in other fruits and spices around the world. So they're actual aroma compounds. And what I try to find is the most universal term that I can to describe that aroma compound that is prevalent in there. If you've got, for example, a Shiraz in your glass or a Syrah, and you're smelling something that smells very much like black pepper, you're probably smelling something called rotundone, which is a chemical compound that is actually present in black pepper, but it's also present in Syrah grapes. So we're not making it up. These aroma compounds actually exist in there. And when we say it smells like this, it's probably because that's the closest approximation to what that aroma compound, and that is universally present. You could probably go in, say it smells like rotundone, but nobody's going to know what that smells like. If you say black pepper, then they're like, or diacetyl. If I could say, I can pick up some diacetyl in there, and everybody's like, what? If you say butter, they're like, oh.
But as we make it, I think it's important to understand what is behind the curtain, as you said. Well said. Fascinating, isn't it?
It is fascinating, it is.
So we had old world, new world, or new vision of wine, old vision. It's just one world of wine. I think Lisa said it well. Terroir is what characterizes the sense of what we really discussing is the sense of place. And there's one world of wine and different styles of Chardonnay, but similar techniques. Some do, malolactic fermentation, some stop them, some let them happen, some do batonnage, no batonnage, endogenous yeast, added yeast. I mean, we all play within that world. What I love here, all those wines are organic and biodynamic, all pure, all endogenous yeast, and we let it be.
Yeah.
And I think it's important, you touched on that, is letting things happen. Isn't it?
Yeah.
What really makes great wine?
Yeah. As I said, the winemaking has to be in the background. It has to push the fruit and the sense of place into the forefront and just kind of frame it there, Say, ooh, yeah, this is what it's about, not about the winemaking.
That's it.
Yeah.
So, dear friends, we have a surprise for all of you.
Oh, yes.
Look at that. Chardonnay is as well in gin and vodkas because this is our JCB.
Not in all gins. This is very rare, actually.
Only us, exactly.
Yeah, this is very rare to find a gin that's made from Chardonnay.
And
that's pretty amazing.
And Lisa was saying, well, let's talk about it because we were telling her that we released this amazing distillation of Chardonnay Pinot Noir a few years ago with great success, and it's a limited edition. We make 4,000 bottles.
Wow.
So we make Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, we make wine, then we blend it, then we distill it, we filter it, and then we add the juniper, the organic plants, and the biodynamic plants in addition. And then here it is. So it's something that is very new, and maybe we'll see Lisa tell us more about spirits in the future. Who knows?
Yeah, well, this is why we were actually talking about reviewing spirits and all of that, and then I just happened to say, oh, I love gin. I would love to review gin.
That's right. Well, is that all your time in England? You think?
No, it's not. No, I'm tasting wine in England. I'm about to go to London. I'm tasting wine in London. But yes, no, there's so many fabulous gins that originate from London. But this is like, it doesn't have any peers really.
No.
I mean, this is so unique. But the nose of it, it's almost like perfume, isn't it? So floral and spicy and citrusy, and it's for a perfumer or for a wine person. There's like, you could spend days just picking out all of those aromatic compounds. Because the other thing is with this, and I don't know if it's the nature of spirits, but each one of those botanics is so well defined in here. It's pretty amazing.
And you sense them, you feel them. Because it's not easy with alcohol at 42%. You cannot get too close to the nose and the glass.
No, you can't because it...
But if you stay like at the distance we're in now, you can really get all those amazing aromatics. So we put the juniper, then over 35 organic plants, and then the biodynamic plants, over 12 to 15 of them, which are in all the biodynamic preps that were into those wines in terms of the soil and the vineyard. So it's pretty exciting because we've created here a full circle. As a spirit, a distillation accompanied with a wine. So it's the continuation. We think we should make Chardonnay, we should make Blanc de Blanc, because it's champagne or sparkling wine, Burgundy, sparkling. And we should make as well spirit. So it's everything we could do with grapes.
So can I ask, because this is such a unique thing, the base spirit that you have, I mean, it must be a bit like a base cognac almost, huh?
Almost. Cognac use Uni Blanc and Pinot de Charente or La Folle Blanche, as you know. So it's grape variety specific.
And it's a different still, isn't it?
Different stills. Yeah. And here we've used exclusively Chardonnay Pinot Noir. So a question you may ask, is it a Mar? Is it a other type of...
like grappa or something?
Grappa, no, because we use wine, not the byproducts of wine, not, the press wines. We use actually wine. It could be brandy in a way, but it's a different treatment. That's the cool part of it. So why it's so expensive, it's $150 a bottle. I mean, not that it's a fortune today, but because we use wine and we make wine, so we lose a lot through the distillation process.
Wow, yeah.
All handmade, Chardonnay, 50-50.
Wow.
We were not discriminatory. 50 Chardonnay, 50 Pinot, that's the base, and then the plants.
So it's a little bit like a champagne, like there's
that's it.
Blending, yeah.
And we don't believe
amazing.
in Pinot Meunier as much, so here it is.
You get a lot of bang for your buck with that, though, because it's just so intense. It's amazing, isn't it?
It's my favorite. And the beauty with gin, you often think of tonic, how it started in the 18th century as that traveling drink. We don't need it.
Yeah.
You have it pure. I keep mine in the freezer. So if I want a little bit of it from the freezer, or you could have...
But you taste so much at this temperature, don't you? I mean, wow, it's just like coats your entire palate, and the texture of it is
Yeah.
just incredible. There's this like really thick, viscous kind of texture that coats your whole palate and just stays there, and you're tasting all these layers, over and over and over again. It's wonderful.
And do you drink sometimes spirits after
Not
all
very
your wine
often.
tasting?
Not very
5,000
often.
bottles a year?
But if I do, it's usually gin.
Yeah, I'm the same.
Yeah.
And why do you think gin?
I think it's because it is all of those aroma and flavor compounds that I'm really crave. I mean, I could never see myself really getting into vodka because it's just so neutral.
Yeah.
But delicate, but neutral. I can't really sort of see. I mean, I appreciate whiskey.
Yes.
But I can't really drink it. But I love smelling and tasting
Of
it and seeing the
course.
difference. And I've done the whiskey trail in Scotland, and it was the most amazing experience. I like cognac and Armagnac as well.
I'm a big fan of it.
Yeah.
I was doing a great tasting over the Christmas, New Year of Armagnacs and cognacs because, we have two, part of the JCB line.
I did not know.
Well, in 1969, which was really more of a fun expression, and a Grand Champagne we make, and we're going to release an XO because cognac is so exciting. I think what is fun, as you not just discovering, but you may do in your new life, is there's a champagne and sparkling wine, and then after dinner drinks are great too. And it's grape based, it's a beautiful progression. And the more I taste cognacs these days, or Armagnac, or Grand Armagnac, Bar Armagnac, I'm really discovering a world that I looked at too fast before.
Yeah, I agree. I in my younger days visited Cognac and Armagnac, and it's a fascinating process, and I think when I am in the mood for the spirit, that's the kind of spirit that I like, just because it's a little bit more delicate and nuanced
and based on grapes.
And based on I don't know if it is that, but I find myself gravitating towards that style of spirit. But I do love gin too.
I notice you wearing a very nice little bracelet today. We're very honored. Huh? Ooh la la! we all
snakes,
in the jewelry mode of the new year, dear friends. Well, how fun was this?
Very fun.
What a Chardonnay deep analytics with Lisa Perrotti. Very, very fun. You want to show us that new book again on California. So it's page 130, I believe.
Yeah, but there's so many great writers in this book. There's Jane Anson's in here. There's our friend Claire Tooley.
For sure.
Writes. Oh, she's such a beautiful writer.
Another master of wine, dear friends, Claire Tooley.
Yeah, there's so many. I've just started. I haven't even read all the articles in here yet, but I've just been so amazed by the wealth of articles and research and knowledge that's gone into this book. And again, I've got no skin in the game really. I've written a very small article for it, but I found the book very enjoyable.
Well,
so,
we will read it, and
well worth reading.
We want to thank you, Lisa, so much. In about 4 days, dear friends, you're going to hear about the big news.
Yes.
The big unveiling. And again, Lisa will be in Europe for 4 weeks, and then she'll be back. Hopefully, she'll want to come back on the show. We can announce her big new endeavor, so you can
talk
all
about it. Yeah,
yes,
that'd be
and
fun.
provide you an exclusive maybe offerings to be part of her new.
Absolutely.
Because we want to encourage, dear friends, on our JCB Live, the talents. And when you look at Lisa's amazing life, and we've become friends along the years, I'm so admirative and passionate about her path, what she's done, what she's achieved, what she shows us we can do in life. Again, I was born making wine and tasting wine, so it was kind of a path already defined for me, but you come from literature, theater, philosophy, now wine, and now doing your own expression of who you are. I really look forward to it.
Thank you.
Dear friends, if you love wine, you love Lisa, and we've had so much fun.
Yeah.
Let's do a double toast. Yes, well,
You've got nothing left in that glass.
No.
I do. Cheers.
Happy New Year, dear friends.
Happy New Year.
To your new endeavors, and congratulations for jumping and creating something new,
Oh,
Lisa.
thank you. Thanks.
Cheers.
Cheers.